The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as William walked slowly down the marble corridor. His footsteps echoed softly in the grand hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. It had been 3 months since his mother's passing, and the weight of grief still pressed down on his shoulders like an invisible cloak he couldn't remove. The young prince had been trying to maintain his composure in public, attending official functions and fulfilling his royal duties, with the practiced smile he had learned to wear since childhood. But behind closed doors, when the cameras stopped flashing and the crowds went home, William found himself lost in a world that suddenly felt much too quiet and empty. His father, the king, had been struggling too, though he tried to hide it behind layers of royal protocol and endless meetings with advisors. The palace staff moved through their daily routines with whispered conversations and careful glances, everyone aware that the royal family was navigating through their darkest hour. William paused outside his mother's former study, a room that had been left untouched since her death. The heavy oak door stood closed, and nobody had dared to enter without permission. Even the cleaning staff had been instructed to leave it exactly as it was on that final day when she had been working on her charity correspondence, planning events. That would now never happen. The prince placed his hand on the cold brass handle, but couldn't bring himself to turn it. Inside that room were all her personal belongings, her favorite books, the photographs she kept on her desk, and the half-finished letter she had been writing to a children's hospital. Everything remained frozen in time, a shrine to a woman who had touched millions of lives with her compassion and grace. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters below, an elderly housekeeper named Margaret was sorting through some old storage boxes. She had worked at the palace for over 40 years and had watched William grow from a mischievous little boy into the thoughtful young man he had become. Margaret had been particularly close to the late queen, often sharing quiet conversations in the kitchen during late evening hours when the formal events were over. As she moved the boxes, Margaret discovered something that made her heart skip. A beat. Hidden behind some old linens was a small wooden chest she had never seen before. It was simple and unadorned, not like the ornate jewelry boxes and treasures usually found in royal storage. Something about it felt personal, intimate, as if it contained secrets that were meant to be discovered at exactly the right moment. Margaret carefully lifted the chest and examined it closely. There was no lock, just a simple latch that opened with a gentle touch. Inside, wrapped in soft blue silk, were dozens of handwritten letters tied with a faded ribbon. The paper was cream-colored and expensive, the kind used for important correspondence. But these weren't official documents or state papers. The handwriting was unmistakably the Queen's, elegant and flowing, but these letters had a different quality to them. They seemed more personal, more intimate than anything Margaret had ever seen. As she carefully examined the first letter without reading its contents, she noticed it was addressed simply to "My dearest William." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she realized what she had found. These were private letters from the Queen. To her son, letters that perhaps were never intended to be sent, or maybe were meant to be discovered at a later time. The dates on the letters spanned many years, from when William was just a small child, right up until just weeks before the Queen's death. The elderly housekeeper sat back on her heels, wondering what she should do with this discovery. Protocol dictated that all royal belongings should be catalogued and reported to the king's private secretary, but something about these letters felt too personal, too precious to be handled through official channels. These were a mother's words. To her son, private thoughts and feelings that deserved to be delivered with care and respect. Margaret decided she needed to think carefully about how to handle this situation. She gently placed the letters back in the chest and closed the lid, but she couldn't stop thinking about the pain she had seen in William's eyes over the past few months. The young prince had always been close to his mother, and her sudden death had left him struggling to find his way forward. As the day progressed, Margaret found herself distracted from her usual duties. She kept thinking about the letters and about William's grief. She had seen him wandering the palace halls late at night, looking lost and searching for something he couldn't name. Perhaps these letters were exactly what he needed to help heal his broken heart. That evening, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following protocol and reporting the discovery to the palace officials, she decided to approach William directly. She had known him since he was born, had bandaged his scraped knees as a child, and had listened to his troubles during his teenage years. If anyone could understand how to handle this delicate situation, it was someone who truly cared about his well-being. Margaret waited until the palace grew quiet, when most of the staff had finished their duties and retired for the night. She knew William's habits well enough to know that he often walked the corridors during these late hours, seeking solitude and perhaps some peace from his turbulent thoughts. Carrying the small wooden chest carefully in her arms, Margaret made her way through the servant corridors toward the main palace. Her heart was beating fast, knowing that what she was about to do could get her in serious trouble if the palace officials found out. But sometimes, she thought to herself, the heart must override protocol, especially when it comes to matters of love and grief between a mother and her son. As she climbed the narrow stairs that led from the servants' quarters to the main palace, Margaret whispered a quiet prayer that she was doing the right thing. The letters in the chest seemed to pulse with warmth, as if the Queen's love for her son was somehow still alive within those carefully written words, waiting for the perfect moment to bring comfort to a grieving heart. William couldn't sleep again. It was becoming a familiar pattern, lying in his grand four-poster bed staring at the ornate ceiling, his mind racing with memories and regrets. The palace around him was silent except for the distant tick of grandfather, clocks, and the occasional creak of old wooden floors settling in the cool night air. He threw back the covers and reached for his robe, knowing that another walk through the empty corridors might be the only thing that could calm his restless spirit. These midnight wanderings had become his secret refuge, the only time when he could let his guard down completely and stop pretending that everything was fine. As William stepped into the hallway, the moonlight streaming through tall windows created patterns of light and shadow on the marble floor. He moved quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone, his bare feet making almost no sound as he walked past portraits of his ancestors who seemed to watch him with understanding eyes. Tonight felt different somehow, though he couldn't explain why. There was an energy in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. William found himself drawn toward his mother's study, the room he had been unable to enter for months. The door stood there like a guardian, protecting memories he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Margaret had been watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to approach. She had known William's patterns well enough to predict where he would be, and seeing him pause outside his mother's study told her that tonight was indeed the right time. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, the wooden chest held carefully in her weathered hands. "Your Highness," Margaret said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. William turned, surprised to see the elderly housekeeper in the corridor, so late at night. Margaret had always been special to him, one of the few people in the palace who had treated him like a normal child rather than just a prince. She had been there for scraped knees and broken toys, for teenage heartbreaks and moments of doubt. "Margaret," William said, managing a small smile despite his heavy heart. "You're up late tonight." "As are you, my dear boy," she replied, using the affectionate term she had called him since childhood. "I have something that belongs to you, something your mother left behind." William's breath caught in his throat as Margaret stepped closer, holding out the simple wooden chest. There was something about the way she handled it, with such reverence and care, that told him this was no ordinary discovery. "I found this today while organizing some storage areas," Margaret explained, her voice gentle but filled with emotion. "I believe your mother meant for you to have it, though perhaps not until the right moment arrived. And I think, Your Highness, that moment might be now." William's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the chest from Margaret's caring hands. It was warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in sunlight instead of hidden away in storage. The wood was smooth and well-worn, clearly something that had been handled with love over many years. "What is it?" William asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. There was something about the chest that felt familiar, as if he had seen it before in some half-forgotten memory from his childhood. "Letters," Margaret said simply. "From your mother to you. I didn't read them, of course, but I could see they span many years. She must have been writing to you all along, saving her thoughts and feelings for a time when you might need them most." William felt his eyes beginning to fill with tears, the first real tears he had allowed himself to shed since the funeral. All these months he had been feeling so alone, so cut off from the mother who had understood him better than anyone else in the world. And now, here was proof that even in death, she had found a way to reach out to him. "Where did you find this?" William asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Hidden away where only someone meant to find it would discover it," Margaret replied mysteriously. "Your mother was always clever that way, wasn't she? She had a way of planning ahead, of knowing what people would need even before they knew it themselves." William nodded, remembering his mother's uncanny ability to anticipate problems and provide solutions before they were even asked for. She had been the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthdays, who knew exactly what to say when someone was hurting, and who could make even the most formal royal event feel warm and personal. "I should leave you alone with these," Margaret said, starting to step back. "But Your Highness, before I go, I want you to know something. Your mother talked about you constantly. Even during her final weeks when she was so tired, she would light up whenever your name was mentioned. She was so proud of the man you were becoming, so hopeful about the future you would create." "Thank you, Margaret," William managed to say, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for bringing these to me and for everything over the years. You've been like family to us." Margaret smiled, her own eyes misty with tears. "You have been like family to me too, dear boy. Now go, find somewhere comfortable to read these. I have a feeling your mother has quite a lot to say to you." As Margaret disappeared back into the shadows of the corridor, William stood alone with the chest in his hands. The weight of it seemed to represent so much more than just paper and ink. It was his mother's love, her wisdom, her continued presence, in his life when he had thought he had lost her forever. William looked once more at the door to his mother's study, and suddenly he knew that was where he needed to be. Tonight, he would finally have the courage to enter that room, to surround himself with her belongings and her memory while he read whatever messages she had left for him. With hands that were no longer trembling, William reached for the brass handle and slowly turned it. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a room that smelled faintly of his mother's perfume and the roses she had always kept on her desk. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the space where she had spent so many hours working on the causes that had been close to her heart. William settled into his mother's favorite chair, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and placed the wooden chest on the desk before him. For a moment, he simply sat in the silence, feeling closer to her than he had since her death. Then, with careful hands, he opened the chest and lifted out the first letter, his heart, racing as he prepared to hear his mother's voice once again. William's hands shook as he unfolded the first letter, the cream-colored paper soft and delicate between his fingers. The familiar handwriting brought an immediate rush of memories, and he could almost hear his mother's voice speaking the words as his eyes moved across the page. "My dearest William," the letter began, dated nearly 20 years earlier when he was just a small child. Today you lost your first tooth, and you were so excited to put it under your pillow for the tooth fairy. You asked me if royal teeth were worth more than regular teeth, and I told you that all teeth are precious because they belong to someone loved. But I want you to know, my darling boy, that everything about you is precious to me, not because you're a prince, but because you're my son. William smiled through his tears, remembering that day clearly now. He had been so worried that the tooth fairy might not visit the palace, thinking perhaps she only came to normal houses. His mother had stayed with him until he fell asleep, whispering stories about magical fairies who especially loved brave little boys who asked thoughtful questions. He carefully set the first letter aside and reached for the next one. This one, dated from when he was about 10 years old. Today you came home from school crying because some boys were making fun of you for being different. You asked me why you couldn't just be normal like everyone else. Oh, my sweet boy, if you only knew how normal you really are. Yes, you live in a palace, and yes, you have responsibilities that other children don't have, but inside you have the same hopes, fears, and dreams as any child. What makes you special isn't your title. It's your kind heart and your desire to help others. William remembered that day, too. He had been going through a particularly difficult phase at school, struggling with the attention that came with being royal, feeling isolated from his classmates who sometimes treated him differently. His mother had spent hours with him that evening, helping him understand that being different wasn't something to be ashamed of, but rather an opportunity to make a positive difference in the world. The third letter was from his teenage years, during a time when he had been rebellious and challenging, testing boundaries and pushing against the constraints of royal protocol. You slammed your door today and shouted that you hated your life, that you never asked to be born into this family. My heart broke a little, not because I was angry with you, but because I could see how much pain you were in. Please know, my darling, that I understand your frustration. I was young once, too, and I remember feeling trapped by expectations and traditions that seemed outdated and unfair. But I also want you to know that this life, with all its challenges, is also filled with incredible opportunities to touch people's lives and make the world better. You have a gift, William, the gift of influence and platform, and one day you'll discover how to use it in ways that bring you joy rather than burden. William wiped his eyes, remembering those turbulent teenage years when everything had seemed so unfair and complicated. His mother had been endlessly patient with him, never responding to his anger with anger of her own, always finding ways to guide him back to understanding and acceptance. As he continued reading through the letters, William discovered that his mother had documented so many moments of his life, both big and small. There were letters about his first day at university, his graduation, his early romantic relationships, and his struggles with finding his place in the royal family. Each letter was filled with wisdom, encouragement, and unconditional love. 1. Letter, written during his university years, particularly touched his heart. Today you called me. So excited about a history paper you're writing about social reform movements. You spoke for an hour about the power of grassroots organizations and how real change comes from ordinary people doing extraordinary things. As I listened to you, I realized that you're beginning to understand something that took me years to learn, that our privilege is only meaningful if we use it to lift others up. You're going to do amazing things, William. I can see it in your passion, in your questions, in your refusal to accept that this is just how things are done. William paused in his reading, overwhelmed by the consistency of his mother's faith in him. Through every phase of his life, through every mistake and triumph, she had been there with encouragement and wisdom. Even when he couldn't see his own worth or potential, she had held on to a vision of who he could become. The letters weren't all serious, though. Many of them contained humorous observations about royal life, gentle teasing about his various phases and interests, and loving commentary on his personality quirks. His mother had captured his essence in these letters, preserving not just the formal moments of his life, but the real, human moments that made him who he was. One particularly amusing letter from his early 20s made him laugh out loud despite his tears. "You've decided to grow a beard, and your father is not pleased. He keeps muttering about proper royal appearance and setting an example. I told him that sometimes young men need to experiment with their image, and that a little facial hair never hurt anyone. Besides, I think you look rather distinguished, though I do hope you'll trim it before the state dinner next week. The Queen of Sweden is visiting, and she's quite traditional about these things." As William read letter after letter, he began to understand something profound about his mother's love. She hadn't just loved him as her son. She had seen him, really seen him, as an individual with his own thoughts, dreams, and struggles. She had paid attention to the details of his life that others might have overlooked, and she had taken the time to reflect on those moments and share her insights with him. The letters painted a picture of a mother who had been deeply involved in her son's emotional and psychological development, who had worried about his happiness and well-being. Above all else, they showed a woman who had balanced her public duties with private devotion, who had found time in her incredibly busy schedule to write these personal messages to the person who mattered most to her. As dawn began to break outside the study windows, William realized he had been reading for hours. The chest was now half empty, with letters scattered across his mother's desk like fallen leaves. Each one had brought him closer to her, had helped him feel less alone in his grief, and had reminded him of the deep bond they had shared. But as he reached for the next letter, William noticed something different about it. This one was newer, the paper not yet yellowed with age, and the date on it made his breath catch. It had been written just 2 weeks before his mother's death, during what he now knew were her final days. William's heart pounded as he stared at the date on the letter. 2 weeks before his mother's death. He had been with her during those final days, sitting by her bedside in the private hospital wing of the palace, watching her grow weaker while trying to maintain hope that she would recover. He had no idea that even then, even while battling her illness, she had been thinking of him and writing him letters. His hands trembled more violently now as he unfolded this final letter, knowing that these might be among the last words his mother had ever written to him. The handwriting was slightly shakier than in the earlier letters, showing the effects of her illness, but it was still unmistakably hers. "My most beloved William," the letter began, and he could almost hear the tenderness in her voice. "If you are reading this, then I am no longer with you in the way I have always been. I want you to know that writing these words is the most difficult thing I have ever done, not because I am afraid of death, but because I am heartbroken at the thought of leaving you when you still need me." William stopped reading and pressed the letter to his chest, overwhelmed by the reality of what his mother had been going through. While he and the rest of the family had been focused on treatments and hoping for recovery, she had been facing the truth of her situation and trying to find ways to continue caring for him even after she was gone. Taking a shaky breath, he continued reading. "I need you to understand something, my darling boy. You have been the greatest joy of my life. From the moment you were born, you have filled my heart with a love so fierce and complete that it has shaped every decision I have ever made. Watching you grow into the remarkable man you have become has been my greatest privilege." The letter went on to talk about specific moments they had shared, memories that his mother had treasured and wanted him to remember. She wrote about the time he had sneaked into the kitchen as a child to help the cook make cookies for the staff, and how proud she had been of his thoughtfulness. She reminded him of the day he had given his favorite toy to a sick child during a hospital visit, and how that moment had shown her the depth of his compassion. "You have always had such a tender heart, William. Even as a small child, you would cry when you saw others hurting, and you would give away your own possessions to make someone else happy. I have watched you struggle sometimes with the weight of your responsibilities, wondering if you are strong enough or worthy enough to carry them. Let me tell you something with absolute certainty. You are more than enough. You are exactly who this world needs you to be. William found himself sobbing now, years of held-back grief finally pouring out of him. All these months he had been questioning himself, wondering if he could live up to his mother's legacy, feeling inadequate and lost without her guidance. But here, in her own words, was the reassurance he had desperately needed. The letter continued with practical advice about his royal duties, reminders about the causes that had been important to her, and suggestions for how he might continue her work. But more than that, it was filled with personal wisdom about how to navigate life with grace, compassion, and authenticity. Remember, my sweet boy, that being royal doesn't mean being perfect. It means being human in the most public way possible and using that humanity to connect with others. People don't need you to be flawless. They need you to be real, to show them that it's possible to face difficulties with dignity and hope. She wrote about her hopes for his future, her dreams for the kind of man he would become, and the impact he would have on the world. She talked about wanting him to find love, to have a family of his own, to experience all the joys that life had to offer despite the challenges of his position. I want you to be happy, William. Above all else, I want you to find genuine happiness and peace. Don't let duty become a prison. Instead, let it be a platform for all the good you will do in this world. And please, please don't spend your life mourning me. Grieve, yes. Grief is love with nowhere to go, and it honors what we shared. But don't let grief define your future. I want you to live boldly, love deeply, and laugh often. As William read these words, he felt something shifting inside him. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but it was beginning to transform into something else. A sense of purpose, a determination to honor his mother's memory by living the kind of life she had envisioned for him. The letter was longer than the others, as if his mother had been trying to fit a lifetime of additional guidance into these final words. She wrote about specific challenges he might face, offering advice based on her own experiences. She talked about handling criticism, dealing with public pressure, and maintaining his integrity in difficult situations. There will be times when you make mistakes, when you say the wrong thing or make the wrong decision. When that happens, remember that mistakes are not failures. They are opportunities to learn and grow. I have made many mistakes in my own life, but each one taught me something valuable about myself and about how to do better next time. Near the end of the letter, his mother's tone became even more personal and intimate. I want you to know that I am not afraid of what comes next for me. I have lived a life full of love, purpose, and joy, largely because of you. You gave my life meaning beyond anything I could have imagined. Being your mother has been my greatest honor and my most important role. But now it's time for you to step fully into your own life, to trust your own judgment, and to follow your own heart. You have everything you need inside you to be an extraordinary leader, husband, father, and man. I have seen glimpses of that future in you since you were small, and I am so excited for the world to see what I have always known, that you are capable of changing lives and healing hearts in ways you can't even imagine yet. The letter concluded with words that would stay with William for the rest of his life. When you miss me, and I know you will, remember that love doesn't die. It just changes form. I will be with you in every act of kindness you show, in every moment of compassion you offer, in every time you choose hope over despair. Look for me in sunsets and in children's laughter, in quiet moments of peace, and in times when you're making a difference in someone else's life. I am woven into who you are, and nothing can ever change that. The letter was signed simply, with all my love, always and forever, Mum. William sat in his mother's chair as the sun rose fully outside the windows, holding the letter and crying tears that felt different from the grief he had carried for months. These were tears of gratitude, of connection, of a love that truly did transcend death itself. William lost track of time as he sat surrounded by his mother's letters, each one a treasure that had transformed his understanding of their relationship and his own worth. The morning light grew stronger, casting a warm glow across the study that had once felt like a tomb, but now felt like a sanctuary filled with love. As he wiped his tears and began to carefully organize the letters, William noticed there was still something in the bottom of the wooden chest. Reaching down, he felt his fingers close around a small object wrapped in the same blue silk that had protected the letters. His heart began to race again as he lifted it out, wondering what final surprise his mother had left for him. Unwrapping, the silk revealed a simple gold locket, old and well-worn, not like the elaborate jewelry that filled the royal collection. This piece looked personal, intimate, like something that had been treasured and handled with love over many years. With trembling fingers, William opened the locket and gasped at what he found inside. On one side was a tiny photograph of himself, as a baby, no more than a few weeks old, sleeping peacefully in what he recognized as his mother's arms. On the other side was an even smaller photo of his mother as a young woman, long before she had become queen, when she was just a girl with dreams and hopes like anyone else. But there was something else in the locket, tucked behind the photos. A folded piece of paper so small that William had to squint to read his mother's microscopic handwriting. The message was brief but powerful. "You were my miracle then. You are my legacy now. Carry this love forward. Mum." William closed the locket and held it against his heart, feeling the weight of it not as a burden, but as a connection to something eternal and unbreakable. This simple piece of jewelry represented the bond between mother and son that death could not sever, love that would continue to guide and strengthen him for the rest of his life. A soft knock at the study door interrupted his thoughts. William quickly wiped his face and called out softly, "Come in." He was surprised to see his father standing in the doorway, still in his pajamas and robe, his hair disheveled from sleep. The king's eyes immediately took in the scene, the scattered letters, the open chest, and his son's tear-stained face. "I couldn't sleep," his father said quietly, stepping into the room. "I saw the light under the door and wondered—" His voice trailed off as he noticed the letters covering the desk. "What is all this?" William stood up, still clutching the locket, and faced his father. For months they had been dancing around their grief, both trying to be strong for the other, neither willing to show the depth of their pain. But something about this moment, surrounded by his mother's words of love and wisdom, gave William the courage to be completely honest. "Letters," William said simply. "From Mum. Margaret found them hidden away. She's been writing to me my whole life, saving up all these thoughts and feelings for when I might need them most." His father's composed expression cracked, and William saw tears beginning to form in the older man's eyes. "She always was planning ahead," the king said with a shaky laugh, "always thinking about what everyone else needed, even when she was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Dad," William said, using the informal term he rarely spoke aloud, "we need to talk, really talk, about her, about us, about how we're going to move forward together." The king nodded, seemingly unable to speak, and William gestured to the chair across from the desk. For the first time since the funeral, father and son sat together without the barrier of royal protocol between them. Just two men who had loved the same woman and were struggling to figure out how to live without her. William picked up one of the letters, one where his mother had written about watching him and his father work together on a charity project. "She was so proud of both of us," William said, reading aloud. She wrote that seeing us support each other was one of her greatest joys, that she knew the monarchy would be safe because we understood that we're stronger together than apart. His father listened as William shared more excerpts from the letters, stories and observations that painted a picture of a woman who had seen the best in both of them, who had believed in their ability to lead with compassion and wisdom. As William read, his father began to relax, the rigid posture of kingship giving way to the natural grief of a widower. "I've been so afraid," the king admitted when William paused in his reading. "Afraid of letting you see how lost I feel without her. I thought I needed to be strong, to set an example, to show you how a king handles adversity. But the truth is, I don't know how to do this without her. She was my partner in everything, my advisor, my conscience. I feel like I'm failing at everything, without her guidance." William reached across the desk and took his father's hand, something he hadn't done since he was a small child. "You're not failing, Dad. We're both just learning how to carry her with us in a new way. Look at this." He showed his father the locket, explaining its contents and the message inside. "She's still with us," William continued. "In these letters, in our memories, in the work she started, that we can continue together. We don't have to figure it all out at once. We just have to take it one day at a time, one decision at a time, always asking ourselves what she would have wanted us to do." His father squeezed William's hand, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, both drawing strength from the connection they had rediscovered. The morning sun was now fully illuminating the study, and the room that had felt like a shrine to the past began to feel like a bridge to the future. "Will you read me some more of her letters?" the king asked quietly. "I'd like to hear her voice again, even if it's through your words." William nodded and picked up another letter. This one, about a state visit they had all made together when William was in his teens. As he read his mother's observations about their family dynamics and her hopes for their future cooperation, both men found themselves smiling through their tears. Outside the study, Margaret was quietly going about her morning duties, but she paused periodically to listen to the soft murmur of voices coming from behind the closed door. For the first time in months, she heard something she had feared might be lost forever, the sound of the royal family beginning to heal, to find their way back to each other through the bridge of love that the Queen had built for them in her letters. 6 months later, William stood before the mirror in his private chambers, adjusting the gold locket around his neck before tucking it beneath his formal shirt. It had become his daily ritual, this moment of connection with his mother before facing the world. Today was particularly significant, the first anniversary of her death, and the day they would unveil the memorial garden that had been created in her honor. The letters had changed everything, not just for William, but for his entire family, and their approach to royal duties. In the months following that emotional night in his mother's study, William and his father had grown closer than they had ever been. They had learned to grieve together, to support each other, and to make decisions guided by the wisdom his mother had shared in her letters. William had also begun sharing selected portions of the letters with the public, with his father's blessing and careful consideration for privacy. The response had been overwhelming. People from around the world had written to express how his mother's words had touched their own lives, how her insights about parenting, loss, and finding purpose had helped them through their own difficult times. The memorial garden was William's idea, inspired by one of his mother's letters, where she had written about wanting to create spaces where people could find peace and reflection. Working with the Palace Gardens team, he had designed a beautiful sanctuary filled with her favorite flowers and trees, with winding paths that led to quiet benches where visitors could sit and think. At the center of the garden stood a simple, stone fountain inscribed with words taken from one of her letters. "Love doesn't die, it just changes form." Around the fountain, William had planted roses in every color his mother had loved, creating a living rainbow that would bloom each year in her memory. As William walked through the palace corridors toward the garden, he passed the study where he had discovered the letters. He had begun using the room as his own office now, finding comfort in being surrounded by his mother's books and personal belongings. The wooden chest sat on the desk, and he still read through the letters sometimes when he needed guidance or simply wanted to feel close to her. Margaret was waiting by the garden entrance, dressed in her finest black dress with a small bouquet of white roses in her hands. She had become even more precious to William since that night when she had brought him the letters, and he had made sure she was given a place of honor at today's ceremony. "She would be so proud of what you've created here," Margaret said softly, as William approached. "This garden captures everything she believed in, beauty, peace, and hope growing from loss." William smiled and took Margaret's arm, escorting her into the garden where a small crowd had gathered. There were family members, close friends, palace staff, and representatives from the charities his mother had supported. The ceremony was intentionally intimate, focused on remembrance rather than pageantry. His father was already there, standing near the fountain with a speech in his hands. Over the past months, the king had also found his voice again, learning to speak about his wife with love rather than just formal respect. Today, he would share some of his own memories of the Queen, stories that showed her humanity and warmth. As the ceremony began, William felt the weight of the locket against his chest and thought about all the ways his mother continued to influence his life. Her letters had taught him that grief didn't have to be an ending. It could be a beginning, a transformation of love into action. In the months since finding the letters, William had thrown himself into the charitable work his mother had started. He had visited hospitals and schools, had launched new initiatives to help vulnerable children, and had used his platform to speak about mental health and the importance of emotional honesty. Each project was guided by questions he would ask himself. What would Mum have wanted? How can I carry her compassion forward? The most significant change, though, had been in his relationship with his father. The king had begun including William, more in decision-making, treating him as a true partner rather than just an heir in training. They had developed a rhythm of consultation and support that honored the Queen's vision of them as a team. When it came time for William to speak, he stepped forward to the fountain and looked out at the gathered faces. Many of these people had known and loved his mother, and he could see his own grief reflected in their eyes. But he could also see something else: hope, affection, and a readiness to move forward together. "My mother believed in the power of gardens," William began, his voice steady and clear. "She said that gardens teach us patience, show us that beautiful things take time to grow, and remind us that even in the darkest seasons, spring always returns." He talked about the letters, about the unexpected gift of his mother's continued guidance, and about how her words had helped him understand that love truly doesn't end with death. He shared some of her insights about resilience, about finding joy in simple things, and about the importance of using privilege to serve others. "She wrote to me once that the measure of a life well lived isn't in the accolades we receive or the positions we hold, but in the hearts we touch and the hope we help to create," William continued. "This garden isn't just a memorial to her. It's a promise that we will continue her work, that we will tend to the seeds of kindness she planted, and that we will help them grow into something beautiful." As William spoke, he noticed tears on many faces, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of connection, of shared love for a woman who had touched so many lives, and of commitment to carrying her legacy forward. When the ceremony concluded and the guests began to wander through the garden paths, William found himself alone at the fountain for a moment. He closed his eyes and listened to the gentle sound of water, feeling his mother's presence so strongly it was almost as if she were standing beside him. "Thank you, Mum," he whispered, "for the letters, for the love, for showing me that endings can be beginnings too." A gentle breeze moved through the roses, carrying their sweet fragrance, and William smiled. He had found his way through the darkest period of his life, guided by his mother's words and supported by the love that surrounded him. The grief would always be part of him, but it had transformed from a weight that dragged him down into a bridge that connected him to purpose, compassion, and hope. As he walked back toward the palace, William touched the locket beneath his shirt one more time and felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he carried his mother's love with him always, and that love would continue to change form but never disappear.